Hello and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you. I took some time off over the holidays to spend with family, which was absolutely fantastic. And now I'm back and excited about bringing you some incredible content with some amazing guests. And my first guest of a brand new year is Dr. Lauren. She is a member of our Child Nexus professional community. She's the CEO and founder of Think Dyslexia and host of the Dyslexia Mom Boss podcast. She is here to talk about a family approach to dyslexia, why it's not only about the child with dyslexia, it really is about the whole family and supporting the whole family. So glad that she's here with us today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Dr. Lauren. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to chat with you again.
I am so glad that you are back. It's been a while since you've been on the podcast. It was actually before you launched Dyslexia Mom Boss podcast.
Yes, it was about probably maybe a year and a half or almost 2 years ago.
This time has gone by so quickly, so quickly. Well, congratulations on the new podcast. How do you feel about doing a podcast? I mean, you were always very visible in terms of providing such great information on your Instagram account. But what is it like doing a podcast?
Yeah, so I have to say, I mean, you have this podcast and I'm sure it brings you joy to connect with so many people.
It does.
I love it. I think what I love about it the most is it's my platform. You know, it's not Twitter, it's not Instagram, it's not Facebook. It's something that I'm creating and crafting and connecting with so many amazing people and then disseminating this information just anywhere, around the world.
Yes.
People can listen anywhere. And I love it. I absolutely love it. It's a lot of work, but I love it.
It is a lot of work, but the reach, like you said, the reach is so much greater because I will look at, who's downloading episodes, like where, and it's like someone in Finland,
I know.
Australia, I think Australia is my third highest downloads outside of the US and Canada. It's incredible.
Yeah, I love that. I do love seeing the locals. And when I say locals, I guess I mean people in the United States. And then I love seeing people all over the world in countries that I'm like, where's this? Like, that's so cool.
Yes. But what that tells me is that this issue is not a US issue. It's not a North American issue. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, learning disabilities, dyscalculia, all of those issues are world issues. And so you're helping folks here in the US, but you're also helping people around the world by giving them this information and giving them strategies, which you do beautifully.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Now, you are the founder of Think Dyslexia, and you are on a mission to bring awareness, knowledge, and change to a systemic literacy issue within public schools, within communities. I was just talking to Sally Shaywitz about this issue, which persists despite decades of research and knowledge. I'd love for you to tell us how you got on this journey with dyslexia specifically.
No, this is I love this question. And, many times when I hear what my mission is, and then I sometimes read it, I'm like, wow, that is a tall order, but that's kind of what a vision and mission is about. You want to really cast a wide net. And so I think my elevator pitch of what got me to where I am today is, and I always say this because I do put out so much rich content and I get a lot of people reaching out to me and they're very vulnerable. in the DMs, emails. And I love it because I'm just such a relationship, deep connection person. But I want to preface it by saying I do not have dyslexia. I did not struggle to learn to read and write, but I struggled in other ways in school. And I was diagnosed later in life, senior year of college, with ADHD. And that was like a whole world of like aha moments for me because my life made sense and my schooling made sense because I really, really struggled just like dyslexics, but I knew about perseverance. I knew about studying, in the quote traditional sense and still failing tests, but wanting to still do well. And I think that was actually that fork in the road of what am I going to do? I was a senior in college and I was like, I'm going to pursue education. And it wasn't until I was in my first graduate program, I was an elementary major undergrad. And I knew after 1 year of 40 credits and going through the student teaching, the practicum, all that, I was like, I don't feel prepared to be on the front lines with these little kids. Like, I feel like I need more knowledge. So that was when I tacked on a special ed degree. And that was where things went. And so once I had these extra 20 credits, I was a certified special educator at that point. I landed a job in a private dyslexic school. And I actually talk a little bit about this in my first episode on my podcast. But what's funny is the headmaster at the time had this vision, I guess, for me, because I thought I was embarrassing myself the entire interview because he's like, do you know what dyslexia is? I'm like, floating letters, kids reading backwards. I don't know. And then he asked me, do you know what Orton Gillingham is? I said, who is that? I literally was like, I'm failing this interview. This is just so embarrassing. But he saw the fire and drive within me. He saw that I connected with that. I felt that population of students. And so I worked in this school for 3 years and I hit the ground running with structured literacy, Orton Gillingham methodology and approach, understanding the dyslexic brain and how to really teach these children. And that really was the start of where I am, what brought me here today. And I think I didn't realize the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge I had and that I was continuing to, expand on until I went to public school. And that was when I was just really confused why no one cared about my Orton Gillingham certification. No one really knew what dyslexia was, or if they did, they thought very minimally about it. Like what I said, floating letters and kids can't read. And that's pretty much it. And so within that journey of being in various school settings, elementary, secondary, public, private, working in a nonprofit, coaching teachers, working as a learning specialist / literacy specialist, I was like, this is something that's got to really change. We have to have the knowledge and resources first to know what we need to change. So that really just brought me to where I am. And I think to loop it all together, that's why the podcast exists, because I know these things. I have colleagues such as yourself who are so well versed in this space, but so many parents just don't know where to go, don't know where to look. And I just feel I have a calling to really put that information out there for all.
And you really do have a calling. I mean, you just have a great way of providing parents, providing educators with evidence-based approaches to dyslexia. You help parents and educators understand the dyslexic brain, as you say. Because it just, despite, like one of the things I said is, despite decades of research and the knowledge that comes from that research, there's still so many misconceptions about dyslexia and what that is. And there seems to be a disconnect between what people know about dyslexia and the struggling child in the classroom who is struggling to read or is reading accurately, but it's reading slowly. Maybe it's not dyslexia, guessing at words. Maybe it's not dyslexia. Maybe they're just really bright and they're just skipping over the words and trying to work too quickly. I mean, we have the research, we have the knowledge, and, really what we need to do is to provide this information, this education, and to keep doing it. Because even though we might be targeting a certain group of people who listen to the podcast, who follow you on Instagram. There are hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people who don't have access to this information, or they're accessing misinformation, which is another problem.
That is another problem. You're absolutely right. And I really appreciate the validation, because I'm always trying to find ways. How can I connect with people who need to know this? What is the most simplistic way? How can we start at, I don't want to say this as a negative connotation, but in the most basic way, where can we start? Because I've seen it before. Parents get very overwhelmed once they get that diagnosis, or when a teacher keeps saying their child's a behavioral issue, they don't know which way is up. And it is a journey.
And I love that you said that about the journey, because it is. Because I think for the first reaction is often, not my child. You must be wrong. My child is very bright, but we know that intelligence has nothing to do with whether or not you struggle with the code of reading. And then there's still a stigma about having these difficulties, whether it be with attention, with learning math, with writing, with reading. And so we have to overcome that first as part of the journey, and then, jump into the understanding of what this is. And then we can move to intervention and support and getting to the other side.
Absolutely.
Now, you often talk about D3, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia together. Can you tell our listeners why you do that? Because oftentimes parents will talk about one, but many times I see all three in the same child.
Right. Great question. So I do call it D cubed. And I think, so I'm so glad you asked that question, because being an adult with ADHD, and then having that late accommodation in life, I actually realized I was making my own accommodations. I was chunking my own information and coming up with my own acronyms or things that connected, that made sense to me. And so I think around the time that you and I met, and I don't know if you remember this, Karen, but we did, what was it? An Instagram live interview.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that.
It was 2 years ago. I actually just found it.
I think it might have been the first one that I ever did. I just remember, how do you do this?
I was so excited. And I remember I was so excited to connect with you, another Black woman in this space who was I really wanted a neuropsychologist, and you were just perfect. And so I just remember back then I was doing those lives, and I would always say dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, like it was a mouthful. And I was getting tongue tied, and I knew what those terms meant, but I'm thinking like, how can I make this more like just succinct, for it to just be like a bloop, there we go. And so it must have been probably about a year ago was when I was thinking about when I used to teach 8th grade math. And I was like, what if I have like a spin on math, D cubed, it's 3 Ds and it's cubed. And it was just like the dorkiness in me, but yet the chunking and accommodation in me that I said, you know what? This is my term. I'm going to coin it. And so people in my community and space, or people who know my work, I know that they really know what I'm saying, because that's what I call it. And so I think that's kind of the story as to where that came from. It was just too much to say all 3 of those at once. But as you also said, more than often, there are those comorbid disabilities where students might struggle more in math and have the math disability, and maybe they're slightly dyslexic or vice versa. But I mean, they have both, or they might have all 3. So they might have the DQ.
Right. And I think that alone can be overwhelming to parents. It's one to hear your child has dyslexia, and then you say, well, and they're also struggling with writing and math, and they may meet criteria for dysgraphia and dyscalculia. So, saying D cubed kind of groups them together, but also speaks to the fact that, like you said, there is comorbidity, there's co-occurrence of these issues, and we need to address all 3 of them. We can't just address the phonological processing issues that impact reading and reading fluency, accuracy and fluency, we have to address these other issues as well. And that can feel overwhelming to parents.
Definitely. Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. And I've seen the parents overwhelmed with, let's say maybe they had, and I'm thinking more of public school now. So let's say maybe their child was last evaluated in 5th grade and they just were, and I'm using just very lightly, but they were just dyslexic. And then let's say maybe they get reevaluated in 8th grade. And then all of a sudden they have a writing disability that the parents were like, well, they really kind of weren't too excited about writing, but, you know, I would push them or we'd get a tutor, but their writing was never where it needed to be. So then if you all of a sudden get that writing disability and that's on their IEP, that can be a whole world of emotions for both the student, I should say the child and the parent. And maybe for the parent, because I've heard this a lot, they probably knew, but just didn't know. They knew something was wrong. They knew something was going on. They thought the child would grow out of it. So I definitely use the term journey. I mean, so much. And actually, this is funny. I heard someone say it's not a trip because a trip is something planned and most likely it's something fun. But a journey is literally, you don't know. Life is a journey. You know, you have no idea what's going to come and be thrown at you. And it's really about how you handle it is really the secret to life, I think. So yeah, there's a lot there.
There absolutely is. And while we know that kids with dyslexia need an evidence-based approach to learning to read, we also know that parent support and training is really important as well. It's really key. It's not enough for them to get, you know, a couple of hours a week with a research specialist or a resource specialist rather. Even if they're using evidence-based approaches, parents need to know, how do I support my child at home? How do I reinforce what it is that they're doing at school at home? You know, parents will say, my child, you know, comes home, they're not interested in reading. They don't read for pleasure. Homework is a struggle. And so they have to have the tools to be able to manage those things at home as well. So it's not enough to have an IEP that addresses a child in the school setting. Parents need tools as well.
Yeah. And I think the best way, because I was thinking about this as we were talking, I think the best way to really put yourself in your child's shoes is to just think of it something that's really basic. If you're not fluent in Russian and you're supposed to be reading 20 minutes a night of Russian literature, that's the last thing you want to do. You don't, you know, especially knowing that is the Cyrillic alphabet, you may not even know how to decode one sound. You may not even know those basic sight words. So when you're kind of forced to do something that, first of all, you weren't explicitly taught to do, and then on top of it, let's say parents don't understand why you don't want to quote try, or why, you know, the frustration or the meltdowns happen. And I think that for me, as a former classroom educator and as a parent, and also just as a human being, I take a holistic approach to everything. And I truly believe you can't separate things. Everything comes together. And especially in a family unit, when one person is struggling, everyone's struggling, but it might look different. So mom might look real strong and make sure that she's getting, you know, all the services you need and making the phone calls, and she doesn't shed a tear because she's fighting for your education. And maybe dad is frustrated and taking it out on you. And maybe your sibling is like not really supportive or whatever it is. All of this impacts the whole family. And so when we know more about, first of all, the diagnosis, the impact of the diagnosis, and that is something to unpack within itself, because you could have a child that was diagnosed at 6, and that impact is going to be quite different from a child who was diagnosed at 15. So there's so much there to really understand. And I know I'm just kind of scratching the surface, but I was really thinking about when you said the 20 minutes a night, and I'm trying to put myself in the frustrated parent's shoes. where they're like, I don't understand. Or I've heard this quote a lot from parents, and I don't mean that, nothing I'm saying is ever in a negative sense. I'm just using real life examples. And
Yes.
it shows why, why I offer the services I do. But parents will say, I loved reading growing up.
Yes.
It's like that has nothing to do with what's happening.
And I just love that you have this family approach to dyslexia, which I think is a really important piece, because like you said, when kids are struggling, it doesn't just impact that child, it impacts the child in the family and the entire family. Because I've had parents say, my younger child has now surpassed my child with dyslexia in terms of reading. Well, what does that do to the child with dyslexia, their self-concept? And even the child who is reading fluently and beautifully and sees their older sibling struggling may be reluctant to read out loud because doesn't want to embarrass their sibling and has that empathy, so there's a lot going on. And I would love for you to talk about, when you think about a holistic family approach to dyslexia, what does that look like, or what should it look like?
So this has been something that I have created based on my experiences working with families. So this is something that I know to most people, when I explain it, it makes sense, but that's not the initial, the initial approach. And so I think the best way to kind of explain it is, if your child is hurting, or if they're upset, something negative's happening, your first reaction as a parent is to just try to make them feel better. Let me just try to figure this out. So if your child is struggling to read and you're realizing their self-esteem is just not where it should be, and you gave the example about maybe a sibling surpassing, and you're seeing all of this. Well, the initial reaction based on my experiences working with families is, let's find an interventionalist. And I think that is fantastic, but you have to unpack that. So first of all, who is this interventionalist? What can they provide your child? Do they know how to really work with a dyslexic learner? So that can be an episode within itself. But then after that, you find the interventionalist or the practitioner, let's just say myself, and I would work with these families, and I would debrief after every single lesson, because I want them to know, first of all, what they're paying for, what we're doing, what we're working towards. I mean, I'm very data driven. And more than often, it would be the parents get really emotional. The parents, it's actually a venting session about the school, or all of a sudden they're having a therapy session with me about how they struggled. I mean, it was like a whole bunch of stuff that I was like, this 45 minutes twice a week is not going to solve the family unit problem. It's going to help the child, increase their fluency, understand the code, understand the 6 syllable types, whatever it is they've hired me to do. But I truly believe that if parents aren't pouring into themselves, and this might seem very intimate, but that's, again, the approach that I take. When you're married and you have a child or children with any form of learning disability or disability, it takes a toll on your marriage. It does. And or mental health issues. It takes a toll on your marriage. And we know, as married people, you have to constantly work at your marriage. And when you have kids and a full-time job, it's like the last thing you want to do. It's exhausting. And so from my own personal experiences, I've realized that is a huge piece. Are there date nights? Are you guys talking about things that aren't just about the child's IEP? Are you pouring into yourself collectively? But then also, are you pouring into yourself individually? And so I went on a very, I guess you would say, a spiritual journey, probably about, maybe it's been almost a year, no, a little less than a year, where I decided I just wanted to really change my outlook on certain things in life. Where do I want to be in the next 5 years? I'm very much a planner. And I really went deep with journaling, affirmations, figuring out who I'm surrounding myself with, because you also want to make sure that you're not just surrounding yourself with people who are just talking about negative things about your child or the school system or whatever it is. So in that holistic approach, I really bring in my own life experiences, but also research-based experiences of affirmations can change the way that you view things. It really, can help rewire certain parts of the brain. And I'm sure you can speak to that as a neuropsychologist.
Right.
But I just realized that these moms were totally burning themselves out. And they thought it was just, I'm paying you for the intervention. You're doing a fantastic job. But, they wouldn't say this, but you could see it. I'm stressed still. Like, when is this going to go away? When is my child going to get better? Where is that barometer where we can stop tutoring? So I know I kind of just talked a lot in that space, and I'm sure there are other things to unpack, but
yeah, but I think that's really important. You talked about the marriage. I've seen a lot of parents who have that initial assessment with me for their child. And then when they do the reevaluation, those parents are no longer together. And they talk about, I've had parents talk about the stressors of raising a child who has struggles, because oftentimes one parent, is carrying a heavier load. It's often the mother, not always, but it's often the mother. And, you mentioned, there's stress, there's burnout. And then when you factor in working parents experience greater interference, stress, burnout, and limitations in their work because of their role as caregivers, but also caregivers to children who are struggling, which adds its own, layer of difficulty. And it can be stressful. Being a parent is a beautiful thing. But there are things that make it hard at the same time. And parents have to have a place to unpack all of that and to really have their feelings validated as well, which is kind of what you're speaking to.
Right. And I think the one thing that I'm doing on my podcast is I have Monday affirmations. Every single Monday, I drop affirmations because I know that it's been a game changer for me. And I know that it can be a game changer for others. Now, you don't have to be a mom to listen to it. That's the audience I talk to. But I mean, really, if you stop and think, our brain goes to negatives first all the time. We have to actively keep changing our mindset. I mean, the way that I relate it is, do you bathe once a month? Do you bathe once a year? I mean, maybe some people do who are listening, and, kudos to you. But I mean, I think in order to have a habit of positivity and pouring into yourself, you have to make it a habit. You have to do it every single day. And when you do, you feel better. And then when you feel better, you can pour into your family. You can pour into those really difficult IEP meetings. Whatever it is your family needs, because it's a holistic approach, that's kind of where you have to start. And when you talked about moms, bearing that burden, absolutely, I can speak from firsthand with those experiences, because I have an older daughter and we went through body image issues and mental health issues. And then my younger daughter was born in the middle of that. So dealing with a teenager and then a newborn and then working full time. And I was working on my doctorate, Karen. I was working on my doctorate when all this happened. So my marriage, of course, was like the last thing. I'm just like, okay, but that's not sustainable. And I have those life experiences to say, like, I had to pour into me, because when I do that, I can be better for the family, and we can really figure out how to make this work to heal the family. Because really, I think it's funny when a parent will say, I don't know where this dyslexia came from. And it's like, no, it's there. It could be maybe you're high functioning and your child is more severe and you don't see it, whatever it is. But this didn't come out of thin air, and we have to really heal all parts of the component and puzzle to then be able to really, walk through this journey feeling like we can do this together.
Absolutely. And I feel like when you talk about the affirmations, it's really about, speaking to your experience and speaking to your truth. But also we know from the cognitive behavioral literature that our thoughts have so much power in how we feel and how we behave. And so if we can change those thoughts in a positive way, it can also transform our mood. That's the basis of intervention for anxiety and depression. And it also can transform the mindset of thinking of parents who are on this dyslexia journey.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100% with everything you're saying. And it really can change your outlook on everything if you can really kind of reprogram the way that you're thinking.
Yes. And when parents transform their mindset, I believe that you've said this, I think I've heard you say this, then you can also transform the mindset of your child, because it's one thing to be experiencing your child's difficulty, but if you are not conveying, the positive affirmations despite struggles, then your child is going to pick up on a lot of those nonverbal cues, the sighs, the heavy sighs that parents don't realize that they're doing, the lack of connectivity and connection, that kids can experience that and feel that, even if it's not said with words, that I'm frustrated with you. I'm disappointed that it's taking you so long to get this work done, that you forgot your homework again, that you refuse to do your reading again. And so again, filling space with those positive affirmations and also letting your child know that you see their strengths as well. Because oftentimes when kids have dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, there's so much of a focus on the struggles that we forget that these kids have talents and gifts and strengths. And it may not be in the academic arena, but we have to honor those as well.
Absolutely. Come from a strengths-based approach. That's what I always say.
Yes. And you also say, I quote you a lot, Dr. Lauren, you also say that a child is not a template, which I think is brilliant.
Yes.
Because even though dyslexia has the same definition across children, it can look different in different children, adolescents, young adults. And that's why the support needs to be tailored to a person's unique needs.
Right. Actually, it's so funny you said that, because, this is another quote you can add to your list of my quotes.
I'm going to write it down right now.
So, when you've met one dyslexic, you've met one dyslexic. And, sometimes people are like, what? And I'm like, no, seriously, think about it. Just because you've met someone who's dyslexic doesn't mean that the next dyslexic is going to be like that prior dyslexic you met. And something to really touch on that you had mentioned about that appropriate intervention. I actually had someone recently ask me if I could recommend a writing curriculum for dyslexic students. And my response was, well, that's a funny question, because if there was a dyslexic writing curriculum, I'm sure the public schools would be using it to shut up these moms that, are, quote, making a scene because they don't have the right curriculum. But the bottom line is, there is no curriculum for the dyslexic brain, because you need to really understand the learner. You need to really understand the severity of their needs, and you need to understand how to individualize it. And that, to me, is the bread and butter, and, why the Orton Gillingham Academy is different from other OG programs that say, here's a curriculum. So I had to say that, because I know parents get and this is another thing parents get frustrated about. They're like, well, what curriculum works, and what should my school be using? And, what should the teacher, and I really feel for them, because they are looking for that, quote, silver bullet, but there really isn't one. I mean, and that's the hard part. And that's when, some parents come and they say, well, I don't have money to send my child to this elite private school. Why can't they get what they need? And, and it's a heavy journey, but it doesn't have to be heavy if you know what you need and what resources are available to you.
Right. You're absolutely right. It's not heavy when you understand what it is that your child is struggling with, when you're equipped with the tools that you need to be able to support your child and advocate for your child with the school, which is another skill that parents often have to learn, because sometimes kids aren't offered what it is that they actually need by the school. And so parents have to really turn up that advocating, gene in themselves and find it and dig deep. And a lot of that has to do with educating themselves, because you have to know what your child needs in order to be able to advocate for their needs.
Right. I agree.
You talked about a number of different things. And I think that what I'm taking away from this is that, yes, we know, and we've known for a while that there are evidence-based approaches to dealing with dyslexia, but we can't stop there. We really have to look at dyslexia, look at the child rather, as a whole, right? And have a holistic approach to intervention. And what I'm hearing from you and what I feel is really important for a lot of families is to get parent support and family support in addition to the evidence-based intervention for your child, because that helps everyone. It helps the family, it helps the child, and it helps the child to feel more supported during this journey.
No, 100% agree with you about that. And I came, like, as I said in the earlier part of this episode, I came to this about probably a year ago. I mean, I can't believe it took me this long to really think about it. But I think after really looking at the various schools, environments, public and private, I'm like, this is a whole family approach. It
Right.
absolutely is. Even though the child is getting the intervention, well, actually, I'm going to change that. The family's getting the intervention. The child is getting the specific, let's say, reading or writing or math intervention, but the family is getting the intervention around their mindset and how they can engage and how they can support and how they can come from more of a loving angle rather than we were talking earlier, the size, the comments that really do add up, and kids may not say it, but they internalize it.
Absolutely. And we know from the literature that, yes, we are changing the brain with these evidence-based approaches, but we also know that environment influences the way the brain changes. And so we are also shaping those changes in the brain by modifying and changing and supporting and enriching the child's environment. And that can be their home environment.
Absolutely.
Dr. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me yet again.
Yes.
I really have appreciated this discussion about how families can support dyslexic children and adolescents at home. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm so glad to have you as part of the Child Nexus community. How can listeners get in touch with you to learn more about your courses and programs?
Absolutely. So thank you, Dr. Karen, for having me on your podcast again. I'm so excited that we had this conversation. And yes, everyone, you all can reach me. So I guess the quickest way is you can email me at drlauren@thinkdyslexia.org, or you can find me on Instagram. I'm always in the DMs and I love connecting. So my handle is the Dr. Lauren. And I also offer, so my courses, actually, most of them are free. And the reason being is because I really want to provide resources for people all around the world, because I know that, price ranges differ. And I just feel like some of this information it needs to be accessible for everyone. So you can go to my, I believe it is Think Dyslexia Academy. And it has, I think I have about 8 courses. I think one is one that you do have to pay for, and that's on multisensory reading. I have tools and tips for multisensory reading and writing, but all the other ones are free access, and they're about dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I think I have some parent coaching sessions in there. So that is accessible. And I also have free consultation calls. So those are my holistic strategy sessions. And I want to actually get to know your family to see if I'm a right fit, to see if I can offer what you're looking for. And then I basically cater my products and services to your family's needs. So I'm very, it's not just like here's this one price point. I'm very specific and individualized, because I truly believe that that's when you really see the change, when you get to know the family.
I completely agree. Thank you so much. And I will be sure to put links to your programs, your courses, your Instagram, all the places where they can get in touch with you in the show notes.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for our very first new episode of 2023. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and join us again next week for a brand new episode. And if you are so inclined, please leave us a review. It helps other people find us, and we would really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.